Right, so we sort of start to really get into project two this session, or drawing project two. So, like I mentioned last week when I did the overview with for project two, it's the main part is the drawing task, but there's quite a few letters and liaising to do with the assessment tasks as well. So the first two are due this Friday, which was a letter to the client for the fees, so just saying what you're prepared to do in terms of service. So that's going to be it'll be working drawings. So it's not going to be the design. Design's already done in terms of your sketches, and we know it fits on the site. So you can sort of pretend that the design's done. You're going to be drawing up that design, and so that's going to be your level of service, the documentation side, and council submission. And then your fee structure is going to be up to you how you want to, word that. But as I said, there's an example in the week one information. If you want to have a look, you can sort of just pretty well use a lot of that information. If you're not sure how to lay it out, or if you've got a better idea or something different, that's fine as well. So it's literally just to say, this is what I'm going to offer you. This is the fee that I propose, and you also have to have some sort of term of engagement, like, so please contact us by this date if you're prepared to go ahead with us, or pay a deposit of X amount, which will be your initiation of taking us on as the drafters, etc. So some sort of uh, agreement, I suppose, so that they can, that's written quite clearly. So so they shouldn't take you too long. That letter shouldn't take you too long to do. And the other one is then we need to engage the engineers. So it'd be a letter to the engineers asking, telling them a bit about the project, so that it's two-story. That you need to engage their services to do some engineering. So it'll be footings for the slab, and some calculations for the trusses, floor trusses you want to use, and could they come back to you with are they prepared to do it, and that sort of thing. So once you do those letters, we'll actually send you back a letter from the tick you off to say that's done, and send you something back from the engineer, which will be the actual engineering drawings you'll get back. So usually it would take a bit longer to get the drawings back, but we'll give them to you quite quickly, so you can start to incorporate that into the drawing. I suppose before we look in too much detail about the drawing project, some of the things that are there for you on the Learn site just to help you along are there's a development requirement checklist, and that is really sort of something that you can go through just quickly and just have a look and find out the sorts of things that you usually, I've sort of just gone through and done the sorts of things that you would usually find out when you start to do a planning application. What do I need to know before I can actually start drawing it out? What sort of drawings you need to submit, what you're actually going to go for, is it planning and building, or one or the other? What sort of drawings do I need to do? So that there's going to be a site plan, floor plan, elevation sections, details, and so if you wanted to print that out and just write some notes as you're checking, it's easy, or you can save it and copy things, type things straight into it. But some just additional notes. So if you see something on the council website that says your site plan must include, you might put that in there. It'll just be a reminder. And that's just a quick way to sort of streamline the process so that you can find the relevant information, get started. But as you're starting drawing, you don't think, oh, was this what council wanted? You don't have to go and try to find the information again, because you've actually written it out. So it becomes part of the client's job folder. And then when you sort of start to get through for planning, what sort of things, so what development area is it in? So this is going to be in the Tea Tree Gully area, so that's the council area. Has it got a policy area? What date did you reference the development plan. So when you look at the development plan, what date are you looking at it? Because sometimes if a job goes for a year or so, if you've referenced something and you think, is that right? Or council comes back and says, you can look and say, oh, that's because I looked back then, you know, so at least you know why you've got something different if it changes. Is it in the residential code area? Now this one won't fit in Resi code even if it is, because it was a larger scale development. They probably, and the setbacks were different and those sorts of things. So we'll just say NA for that one. I would say just not applicable. We've already looked through the Resi code and what it is. We don't need to do it again for this assignment. Is it in a heritage zone? That's going to be no. Is it in a flood zone? What sort of setbacks are required? So just have a look in the development plan and see what setbacks are. So 2-story usually is a metre on the lower level, or 900, but the second story they sometimes require 2 metres. Is there going to be, if it's two-story, which it is there going to be any overlooking in neighbouring properties? So just have a sort of think about that. So you might need to get that property location browser up and have a look at the location and see whereabouts, you know, you think that the site's going to look over. Is there any neighbours right there? Have they got some windows on that side, or even a veranda or something like that that you're going to look into? Is there any overshadowing possibilities? So if there's some single-story places on the southern side of where you're building, are they really close to the boundary? It's good these days when even on Google Earth you can actually see who's got solar. So if there's solar quite close to a boundary and you're up, you know, building 2, there might be some overshadowing possibilities there. Rainwater, do you need detention or retention tanks, and what's the sizes? So it might be that there's a minimum requirement. Usually there's 50 square metres of roof means at least 1,000 litres plumb to the laundry or toilet. But some councils have a requirement for that the rainwater tank can't be more than a certain height. So they don't want it to be higher than 2.4, sometimes it's even 2.1. And I think that's to do with they don't want it seen from the street. It's a bit weird, but is it in an ocean corrosion zone? This will be no. Any energy efficiency rules or policies other than the rainwater tank? So if there's anything listed in the development plan, any roof cladding requirements and any building materials that they're looking for you to use or not use. And then you know there's a page there for general comments. So most places at your work would have something like you know, that it would be a lot more detailed that you would actually go through when you start a job. When a client says, this is my block, or you've decided they bought a block from you, whatever it is, you'd be going, okay, this is the type of house they want. How do we fit this on? What are the requirements? What are our rules around this particular house? I've also put a site plan in there as a CAD plan so you can see, but I've done it as a PDF down further as well, so you actually get the site plan. We're going to be using this Residence 1 area, so when you get to plotting the site plan up, you can copy all this information, or you probably don't have to have the contours because it was benched anyway, but you'll locate your building sort of around here, and you can have a bit of an idea of how much private open space there was, whereabouts the rainwater tanks are going to be located, visitors car parking, etc. And we'll probably still just do the whole site, but we just don't need to plot all the other residents. It'll just be this one here. And it sort of gives you your setbacks and things like that anyway that were used. So that way then you know all the buildings got to fit on the site. So because it's in Tea Tree Gully, there's a link that goes to new houses and extension, and it talks a little bit about what you need to lodge. So it goes through a list of things here, so have a little look what they were looking for in their site plan. Any requirements for the elevation. So elevations show appearance of the proposed building. As a minimum, the elevation must be 1:100. So they actually give you all the scales. So it also says they provide details, proposed external building materials, finishes and colours. Okay. On the sketches, we looked at quickly last week, which are here in the assessment sheet. We just scroll down to the bottom with the sketches. I've actually given you all of those on the design sketches anyway. So these are all the colours and those sorts of things. So you can pretty well copy a lot of those notes. They're not going to change for us. So to be that similar to that, you've got the roof sheeting written in there. You've got the type of garage door. You've got that there's stainless steel marine white, the PGH Santorini block piers that are at the front for the portico, and the colours of the texture coating. So there's a bit of a feature band around the house as well to break up the big blank walls, and also to hide the joins for the hebel, which we'll talk a little bit about today. And then there's obviously the texture coat colour, which is a cappuccino candy 6, cappuccino candy 1 and cappuccino candy 6 with like a sandstone paved block at the front. Wasn't very exciting, the colour scheme of this house, I can tell you now. Yeah, so you don't have to sort of worry too much about coming up with those. I've given it to you because in a design stage, the client would usually tell you what they wanted anyway. So we're past that. If you imagine, we're just documenting it. The other things that are in the research there is the site location. So it just gives you, a bit of a snip out of where that is from the development plan. I've already put up, just to give you a bit of a heads up, I suppose, the actual framing and truss, which usually wouldn't get until you finish that letter to the client and those sorts of things, and the engineer. But because it's the first time you're going to sort of be interpreting that information, I'll give you a bit more of a chance to have a look. So with the framing details, these are all from an engineer for the actual job. We've got all the roof framing information. So have a little read at the top as well, because that gives you some of the general information. So the set out of the trusses, the ceilings, the rondo, the purlins that are going to be used, the speed bracing, and any stabilisers that might be in there. And then on the actual drawing here, or the sketch from the engineer, is all the details of where those things are. So we've got all the P's are purlins. You can see here there's a P 120 by 45. So they're these purlins running this way. We've got another purlin there, and we've got some rafters at 120 by 35 running this way. So the lower roofs were actually rafters and purlins done traditionally, and the the main roof up the top was trusses. So that's T1, T1, so they're all running this way. And then we get these T2s, 3 of them, because they run right through the portico at the front, so they were longer. And then back to T1s, and then the shorter ones, because of this cutout of the building here, are T3s. So they all have the same pitch, but some of just extend longer to the end to reach, or shorter to reach the end of the building. Now they had a cutout at this end to allow for the box gutter. Okay, so they were actually manufactured with that allowance for the box gutter. So we'll look more at these details as we start drawing, but just so that you've got a bit of an idea of what it's talking about. The SB and all these ones going this way is the speed bracing, so it refers to speed bracing here. You won't have to draw any of that in, you just have to allow the right height for the trusses and do the box gutter detail. And so in your section, if you're drawing the location of the trusses, you'll now know that they're at 1200 centres, so you want to sort of have them spaced like that if you're showing something. And the front little roof over the balcony is done with rafters as well, and there's a couple of steel beams there that you'll just put steel beams to engineer's details in your section, same as this note here. It's got your wall bracing. It's also got then the floor trusses, so similar sort of drawing that shows all the stabilizers and all the different size trusses going through. When we get to this, we'll talk about it in more detail as well, but where you see the packers, it means that the trusses were actually smaller, so that it allowed for a step down in the wet area, but where they actually run past the wet area, they then pack the top of that truss up so that that floor becomes level with the bigger trusses again. So that's what the packing is. There's also some quite big high span 400 by 45 beams around where the stairs are, and there's actually a perimeter beam that goes around as well that's quite big. So the perimeter beam 120 by 35 there. More bracing for the other levels. And the truss information here has actually got all the truss that came from the engineers with the heights and the sizes and the lengths. So you've got your cutout for the box gutter at the end. When we get to doing the box gutter as well, I've got a fair bit of info, so we will go through that like in the morning session of what, how we design box gutters. I have given you the sizes in the specification that you need, but I'll talk about where that comes from and give you an insight of how we would design a box gutter. So that sort of info I'll leave up there as well. A link to the Hebel site, because the cladding is Hebel. So we're in this multi-residential area, and when you go into the multi-residential, we're going to be using a inter-tenancy party wall. So that's going to be the party wall on the end where the next unit would usually be abutting. We don't have to draw up the next unit, but we need to show the party wall. And we're then also going to use some external wall cladding. So that, this is sort of some units that have been done as well. So there's lots of details through here. So we're going to use the power panel external wall system. The power panel 50 wasn't around when I did this project, so we'll use this traditional one here. And it gives you a heap of information there of how it looks, a bit of a rundown of that sort of thing, and you can go in and actually download one of the manufacturer's details if you want. Hebel installation is the design guideline, so it saves you sort of looking. I've already just copied it down and downloaded it for you, so you don't have to wait for all that to happen. One of the most important things, I suppose, about this Hebel is, or there's two things, is that one I mentioned last week, it can't be cut more than 300, shorter than 300. When it's fixed to these top hats in a two-story situation, you've got to allow some control joints. Now, what tends to happen on a two-story house is that the panels are so heavy on the top floor, and we're using pine frames, the pine actually shrinks after a while with the weight. So they actually allow a 25mm gap between the top panels and the bottom panels. So on all the top level, the panels are placed, and when they do the bottom level, depending on which one they do first, they leave a 25mm gap around the building. Obviously, we don't want to leave that gap there or make it visible, but usually what they would do is either put some silicone in there and texture coat it so it looks smooth. So, or a better way to do it is actually, if you can get away with putting some sort of a foam extruded band around the building. And that's what we did, because one of the things that council didn't want with some of the large walls was just these plain big rendered looking walls. They wanted a bit of articulation. So by putting the band there, it sort of achieved two things. One, it broke up the spans of the wall, or the height of that wall, and two, it allowed us to have that 25mm gap. So the foam band was actually stuck to the top portion of the top panel, but the lower piece, so it was glued there. But on the bottom panel, it just sits over the gap, and it just sat over the top. So when they do the texture coat, they actually slice it underneath as well and put another bit of silicone. And then as that frame shrinks, the foam panel actually just drops down a bit, so you don't actually see it as squeezing it. If you just put silicone in there, what happens when it does drop is it actually bulges out. And if you look around at a heap of Hebel apartments that are happening the last sort of year or so, now that they've started shrinking, you actually really see that line because it has bulged the silicone out a little bit. Or what you'll see is it'll be nearly flush, but you'll still see the line because they've put their silicone at the back side of it and left a bit of a gap, and now that it's squashed down, it's just about there, but you do see the line, and it's never a real straight line. So it can look a little bit untidy. So a band can sort of make it look a bit neater if you can get it in the right place. But start looking around at those sorts of places, and you'll know what I'm talking about. As soon as you see it, you'll go, oh, that's what it is. You know, it's one of those things you probably don't notice unless you're looking for it. So there's a heap of information about Hebel and how we need to use it. But two of the things about Hebel is, one, it's great insulation, gives you a better R value for the wall system, and it's really good for sound insulation as well. And that was a real bonus for these apartments when we did them, because they're actually all the three of the units on the opposite side to what we're building actually ran past the O-barn. So it really deadened that sound of that O-barn coming through all the time. There's a couple of images showing, you know, different ways to attach the panels, etc. While I'm scrolling through here, I'll give you an idea of where the two-story examples are. So it comes through here. So this is that gap that I was talking about. And it sort of shows you now talking about horizontal joints and locations for windows, etc., and trying to come up with some good locations. And this is that deflection gap that I was just talking about between the two panels. So it's all in here. I just sort of point you out to it. So it actually tells you to refer to, you know, the detail on 3.4, page 45. So we'll head down to page 45. Installation as well, it's on the power panel on top hat, and obviously the top hat's screwed into the stud, so that gives you a bit of an idea of how it's working. So here's your information on sort of, you know, what's happening with this area here. So it's more that diagram there. So lots of little sketches and details for how the panels are set out. And this is what I was talking about with the set out of an external corner last week. One side of the building is going to come along, the other one's going to be butted up against. So you've got to decide which side of the building that might work better for when you're laying your panels out. Because at some stage when you go along the building, there might be one that's like 295, and you think, well, I've got to allow another 5mm, so it's not 300. So if you moved it back the other way, would it work better if this one came right along, etc. I don't know whether this brochure actually gives you, that's it, yeah, it does. They give you this miscellaneous detail, which is a panel layout drawing. And so when you're using Hebel, one of the things that's a good thing to do as you're starting, once you've got your initial floor walls drawn in, or your floor plans done with all the walls in, if you place your sort of windows within around the areas that you think they're going to go. I would tend to set up a grid, and if you set up a grid around your drawing in both ways, that's 300. Straight away you'll see if any windows are going in and if the panels need to be moved. And that's essentially what they're sort of doing here, is that you can see each panel and which size they're going to cut them to, and where your control joints, etc. are. But the main thing for us is to actually see, if we set up a 300 grid everywhere, you can actually say, right, there's one that's now, only 220. What can I do along that wall? And it allows you to shift your windows quite quickly to be within the grids as well. So that way you don't have one that's half in and half out sort of thing. So it's quite a quick way to do it. So they give you that, that's a bit of a guide of setting it out, so that it makes it much easier on site with heaps less waste. The other product that we're going to be using is the Sky-On flooring for the decks, or the one-tiled balcony, I suppose, the main deck. So this is a compressed sheet type of product, and it does have a sort of a tongue and a groove that allows it to go together, but it's a perfect substrate for a sealed floor, so we don't want moisture to go through, and it's a good substrate for tiles, so it's going to be a tiled front deck as well. This will be when you start to get into your detail. I just pointed out to you now so you know how we're actually going to, this detail here, wall to deck flashing, this is going to be what we use for that front deck. So when you do a detail of the front deck, it's actually sort of copying this, but instead of this front cladding being so thin, it'll be the Hebel cladding. Okay, so on that front, you know that the Hebel will sort of just come down here, and then obviously you'll have the Sky-On flooring on the floor joist at the front, wet area membrane, waterproofing membrane, and then obviously our tiles above that. Now, one thing to note here is that it says that there's 50 to 150 max from inside finished floor level to finished deck. So there's a dimension there that says 150 to 150, 50 to 150. So that means from this finished floor level, there has to be at least 50. Okay. Now, the reason there's a range there, they haven't given you just one, is that it was all dependent on what wind speed area you're in. The higher the wind speed, so if you're down more closer to the beach, N3s and that sort of thing, the higher that step has to be. So it's all to do with rain hitting the balcony and then the wind pushing it up underneath the doors into the house, because that's where it all starts to rot and the carpet gets wet and all those sorts of things. So for ours, it's only in an N2 area, so it's okay. So we could probably go for about 75. Be quite good. There is an Australian standard for that, and I can when we get to that detail, I'll actually show you that, and it'll show you what the actual minimum distance is for all those wind speeds. The other detail that would be quite good to have a look at is the one straight below, which is the edge detail for the deck. So one of the things that you have to remember is we're going to have an engineered beam with the joist sitting on top of that. When the water rolls off the front of a deck, the last thing you want is it dripping down the front face and returning back underneath and hitting the timber that's underneath supporting the deck. So in order to make it drip off, there's a couple of things that you can do, but this one's a really simple detail. They actually put like a little equal angle aluminium extrusion in there. So I get that a little bit bigger so you can see. Can you see that little extrusion there? So that's screwed in underneath on the Sky-On cladding. So when they put their waterproof membrane, it comes around the edge here. So any moisture that's going to drip off here now runs down. As it starts to run, it has to hit that, and it drips off there. Okay, so that's quite a clever little detail. Other ways they can do it, if it's not a sky-on cladding, sometimes if you've got exposed rafters on the top of the skillion roof, like the front edge that's obviously going to roll back, they actually put a saw cut through underneath. So it's got a little gap. So as the moisture starts to run down, instead of it running through and getting into your cladding inside, it actually hits that and drips off there. So there's lots of ways you have to sort of think of how do we stop moisture getting in. And other ways, sometimes if you stop this cladding a little bit sooner, if you had it sort of running flush on this edge, you might actually tile the front edge. So this tile might wrap around and come down here as well. So the waterproofing barrier would still be in here, and you'd still put some of this substrate on there. But if you imagine that wrapping around this corner here, you would hang it lower than the timber. So then that front face acts as the drip as well. So it just depends on the detail that you want. I would probably, on these ones, actually put a tiled front face. That's what we did, which the tile hung a bit lower because it just looked a bit neater, because the actual colour of the tile came around the edge as well. That finished it off. And you didn't tend to see the drip marks going on any of the different colours. It was such a light paint finish. We thought if that's going to be painted the light cappuccino colour, which is almost like a darker cream, you would see that water marking. So we actually ended up putting the tiles over so it didn't stain it as much. So yeah, so there's things like that you sort of got to think about when you're doing these slightly more detailed buildings. Yeah, how we sort of stopping moisture getting in and all that sort of prevention of water damage. So I've sort of linked those, the Hebel installation and the Sky-on, straight to those brochures that you need, so it's not a wild goose chase taking up too much of your time trying to find it through the sites. We talked about the openable windows as well, so the upper story bedroom windows will need to be changed from the sketch. That's one of the things what I've done on purpose, is left them so that they do need to be changed. So you'll have to have some sort of lock at 125 or a screen, you decide. But have a look at that brochure for the details. It'll save you from going straight to the NCC. You can read the NCC detail about it as well, but that gives you a bit more explanation. And we'll have to check all of the windows meet light and ventilation rules as well. So the NCC requirements for this one are these ones here, which is in the assessment task. So the safe movement of stairs is the one I was just referring to, balustrades and the protection of openable windows. So that little safe movements area is about that. The termite protection is going to be a note. It's a slab, so one of the ways that we protect we don't protect it. It's a visual barrier that helps with the protection of termites on a slab. Does anyone know what that is? From the paving, what do we do with the edge of the slab? Between the paving and the dam. Yeah, so that's right, Nick. So there's a 75 minimum from the top of the paving or the concrete path around your house to the bottom of the rebate. So you've actually always got 75 mils of clean slab to see, so that when you're walking around your house and you see a little mud trail starting to go up, you know you've got a problem. Okay, so hopefully before that happens, so it creates a bit more distance. So the way termites like to get in is that they don't like light, so they build a mud mound in front of them and go up. And so if there's a fair distance of light, chances are they won't try to get up there unless they're really hungry. So usually your neighbour's house will get eaten before yours if yours is all right. So termites are always around. It's just whose house has got the weakest entry point, that's where they're going to go. So that's actually quite important to put on our details. So because the rebate, like I mentioned last week, is up to us how far we want that rebate down and the width. So for us, we're going to have our timber frame on the finished floor. We know now we've got a 25 top hat for the Hebel. That was what was written on those manufacturer's details. And then we've got the Hebel panel thickness. So we want the Hebel to come down a little bit past the floor, and how far we want it down is up to us in terms of, think about your panel sizes and that deflection gap at the top, and if there's any windows. So do we need to sort of make it so it comes down a little bit so it meets up the top of the door maybe, things like that. And then when we're detailing that rebate, we'll show that then a distance from the top of the paving. So if we draw our paving, we draw our compressed or paving sand and that sort of thing, and then our ground line underneath that, we can actually show that dimension, say top of the paving to the rebate 75 minimum. A lot of the time, any of the workers on site that start to do any of the landscaping and that, they might think we're going to allow 75 from the where we put this, you know, compressed or the sand, the bedding sand and stuff, and they'll measure 75. But then if you put the paver on top, you've lost that room. So, so if that's detailed there, if you come along when you're doing your checks, or if you're coming on site for anything else, and you see, hang on a minute, that's looking like it's going to be pretty close to that bottom of that rebate, you can actually go over and say, hey, to the site supervisor, what's going on with this, you know, this is where it says it on the document. So as soon as you've got it on the document, they've got to fix it. But if it's not there, you can't sort of say, oh, I forgot to do that, can you... folder structure as per the last project, but it's just going to be a new one with project 2 information. So this one's going to have some client correspondence in there as well. And we went through all this detail quickly last week, but that's that. Be as you start drawing, have a little look at and get some information out of that. That's just how you know what the site looks like, but use the PDF and the CAD drawing when you start doing that. That's on Learn separately, it's a bit clearer. Your window sizes are all in there as well, but these are just real quick sketch window sizes, so make sure they are standard. So use, you know, one of the brochures from A&L or Stegbar to just come up with your standard sizes. You can change the bedroom windows so that they comply as well if they need to be a little bit not as high. So if you want to take some width off the bottom or some height off them. The thickness as well, the thickness in here was just, these are obviously just Revit windows that have been placed in there. Thickness for residential doors is 35, so just make sure you change that, or don't show your thickness on your schedule. And the same as what you did for the last project, any windows that are frosted needs to be, or obscured needs to be shown, and any safety glass for any of the en-suites or bathrooms needs to be shown on there as well. Now, the other thing that I've got there when you start drawing up is a cavity slider door family for internal sliding doors, because this one had quite a few. And it's in that zip file, there's also the rain head to use to place on the top of your downpipes. So when we get to that, you can load those in, but you probably need the door pretty quick, so you could download those and keep it in your folder now as well if you wanted. If we just quickly look at the floor plan sketch here, you can see downstairs there's a sliding door going into the laundry, a sliding door going into this hallway that takes you out the back door, and a sliding door to go in the toilet. So there's 3 there. Sliding door between the garage. So there's 4 sliding doors on the lower level internally. And upstairs there's a sliding door here on this storage area, and a sliding door in the ensuite. So there's quite a few cavity sliding doors in there. Any questions about any of those details so far? It's a pretty big project, but it's you've got all the information you need, so don't be too overwhelmed by it. Just start where you usually would start, looking at the development plan, get some ideas out of that. Anything that sort of throws up any curveballs, you'd be just able to ask me and say, it says this in the development plan, what do you think? So I'll act as the duty planner, I suppose, and that's what you would usually do when you're starting to draw. Ask lots of questions to council, because before you start doing too much, if you're not sure, they'll soon tell you whether you can do something or not, and that's their job. That's why they're there. Yeah, they start having a look at the heaval set out, drawing it up your walls, making sure that that's going to work. Once you've got that done, it'll be just really drawing through, looking at the specification. We'll get to the details eventually in the sections. When we get to the sections details, I'll do a bit more. I'll show you some more examples of the actual drawing, so you get to see what the details look like. But we'll probably definitely do sort of 4. As I said, we'll have 2 sections through this one last week, one through the stair area and one somewhere upstairs that shows the front balcony, and that'll show then the box gutters as well and the front balcony in that section, that we can then do call outs for those. So council would always want wet area details, so front balcony being one, we can get our balustrade height from that, stair detail, box gutter detail, and probably like an ensuite or something like that as well. So in terms of what we're sort of starting today, if you start doing your planning drawings, if you get all your sort of checking out of the way in terms of, what does council want from that checklist, site plan. So it'll be a very loose site plan, just showing where the building is going to be positioned and the setbacks, and the access from the road. We'll show both floor plans, but they won't have that much detail. A couple of dimension strings on each side will be plenty. Windows in the position that they'll be in, doors in the position they'll be in. Stairs, but not necessarily accurate stairs, just showing that there's a staircase there. So we can work out the detail of the stairs a bit later for the building rules. Elevations, really just showing the overall height of the building, the articulation, so what's happening on the front balcony, where the windows are, colours. We don't need any sections or details for planning, so that'll be really it. And then same thing, we'll save those files and work through and keep going with your sections, details, and a bit more information on the floor plan as you go. So that's just a image to show you what one of the townhouses. So that's the opposite one to yours. So that's looking out of the one that we're drawing up straight across the front. So a couple of things that changed on site after we'd finished our job was that they changed the balustrades to glass. So we're not going to change those. We'll still use the marine wire as we've got there. pros and cons of both. Marine wire probably has a bit more climbability for children, so it can be a bit riskier. Um, Probably didn't change in terms of privacy. It didn't really change from the glass. But the front, this little front roof on this front balcony, we actually had a gutter on the front, so we had an eaves gutter so that you could actually see the roof and the eave. The client sort of hadn't realised we'd done that and changed their mind at the front. So as the builder started, they said, "Oh, we don't want to see the end of we don't want to see any roof sheeting." So they actually, capped the front and put a little gutter inside, which ran to this rain head here. So we still had a rain head here, but we just had our front eaves gutter running into it. We really did. We don't like. Well, I'm not in that business anymore, but me and my business partner, we both agreed that we just didn't like doing box gutters because they were, at some stage, they are going to be problematic if they are left uncleaned and that sort of thing. So especially on a two-story when they're hard to get to for people, as soon as there's debris up there and they start to break down a little bit, get stuff in them. If a box gutter floods, it doesn't have anywhere to go except through the roof and into your ceiling. So it's very expensive. So once it gets through there, carpets, walls, all that sort of stuff. Whereas an eave gutter, if an eave gutter starts to overflow, it actually spills over the front of the gutter. It does come back a little bit underneath the eaves, etc., but it's not as, you see that and that tells someone I need to do something. You can see it happening when the first flood sort of situation. Whereas a box gutter can be leaking a bit until it gets really bad and then it's too late. So the front one, we thought we'd definitely get away. We tried at the back as well what we were going to do because it was the back of the building was have eaves gutters, so the roof was going to run back and it wasn't going to have the parapet going up as high. But the client really insisted, so we said that's fine as long as you understand, why we don't want to do it. So we thought we'd got away with them having the front one, but then when it went on site, they changed it. They also took away the banding around here. Can you see that banding's disappeared? And they had some big problems on site when they did that. And it was, they hadn't actually finished yet, but what the builder did is they decided to ignore that banding and that detail of that 25mm gap, and they actually sat the Hebel on top of each other. And within a couple of weeks, so the builder was still there doing other things, all of the lower level doors, so these front sliding doors, actually weren't opening. They were jammed shut because the Hebel was then coming down and hitting the top of that lintel and deflecting onto those wider doors. So the builder had to hire all the scaffolding again, and actually what they did was they cut a 25mm gap out of the Hebel that they hadn't left in there in the first place. So end up costing the builder a lot for leaving that detail out. But then they siliconed it in and painted it. So I dare say if I went past now, that silicone would be bulging out. You'd see a bit of a gap there. This was the same as the drawings that with the porticos with this Santorini block that the client wants, but you can see the colouring. Really it's quite bland, like it's just all cream. The door's a little bit darker, and they did a darker fence. I suppose it broke it up a bit. But these areas here with the shorter pieces of Hebel, these are the bits that I was sort of saying to you around these windows that you probably have to use something like a blue board compressed sheet and pack it out. So just show that on your detail. They were the insides of some of the. These were the front units that they took most of the photos on the inside of. But the en-suites and master bedrooms were huge. One of the things that I think that the client didn't realise with the beds, they kept saying they wanted them bigger upstairs, but because they had en-suites and walk-in robes, the only thing that needed to go in the room was a bed. and so when you only have to have a bed in the room, you don't actually need that much space. So it had, like it's like a dance floor around, the sides sort of thing. They were quite big, and when you start drawing that up, you'll notice how big they are. So that's again the other view from it. So enough room for chairs and tables and all sorts of things with all this wasted space through here. That's the one connected to the other side. So this is the party wall detail that you'll have to show as well. So the party wall coming right through, and that's for fire protection and sound as well from one unit to the next. That's sort of looking at both of the ones opposite, so you get an idea of how they connected through there. Bathrooms, that's again one of the front ones. And this is the little courtyard from the one that you'll draw up. So this was their front area, which if you're in here, it was sort of quite private. They couldn't see straight in, so it wasn't too bad. But upstairs, the privacy was a bit of an issue. Looking straight across from one to another with your glass balustrades, etc. So that's a couple of images just to give you an idea of what it looked like before they were all sold. So hopefully that gives you a bit of knowledge of where you're going to go from here and get them all done. So when we did this, I suppose the other thing to think about is you're just drawing one up, but we only ever started with one. So there was 6. If I get the site plan back up, I'll get that one up. So if we look at the one that you're drawing up, we started with one of them. Once we had that right and we knew that that distance would fit in there, that one was mirrored, and those 2 were then mirrored across the other side, which became 4. So it wasn't actually that much more work to draw 4 than 1, because they were identical. There was no, this one wants this and this one wants this. In the terms of if it was someone that wanted to then allow clients to do different selections and kitchen and all that, you would still have exactly the same building. It'd be just the selections for the tiles and the finishes that would be different. So it's not that much. And the front 2, same thing. We did 1 and flipped it to make 2. So when we quoted this job up, I mean, you'll quote it up as though it's just going to be 1. Even though there was 6, we sort of quoted it like there was 2, because the design was only really for 2, and then we just mirrored it, which wasn't a heap of time. So it wasn't as if we sort of said, we've got to draw 6, like there's 6 times whatever amount it was. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what you would do if you did say someone has 2. It's like, you can add a little bit more on, because they're getting 2, but you don't have to do that much more work. I'll put this on the recording as well, but this is probably like be your first preliminary submission. So there's just a cover sheet that's got your sheet, what you're going to be sort of doing. The site plan, for the preliminary, I don't mind if you actually just plot the example one on there and just put proposed residence 1, because all that stuff's been decided in the design, that we know it fits on site and that sort of thing anyway. So don't go drawing the whole thing up. Like, I don't want you wasting time drawing something that's already there.
So sorry, which?
So that's the site plan that there's already a CAD plan there. Okay. So you could actually just import the CAD plan and move the CAD plan around your house and put proposed residence, and that would be fine. And then when we go to the next stage, we can use that CAD plan to take some of the, we'll take the contours and all those sorts of things off, because that's sufficient for planning development. Ground floor, just you won't have to necessarily have all the kitchen details or the tiling done, but just your room names. Maybe start sort of having a look at your legend and some wall types so that council can see what the material is, and just a few dimension strings around each size. So both levels, first and second. So there's 3 wall types, plus the internal, plus the portico brick wall here that have been listed. So they've got wall type 1 being that Santorini brick or block, wall type 2 being the power panel, 3 being the intertenancy wall, so that party wall there, and then 4 being the there's 4 different to 2. 92. So 4 is got 4 is this one, I believe. So it's just another layer of Hebel on the inside of that wall than the outside of that wall. Don't worry too much about that one at this stage for planning. You can just make sure you've got the party wall shown and then the other walls. And then your elevations, you know, a couple of notes, not too much, just that, you know, the front, what the colour is going to be at the front, there's marine wire and the blocks. That's really all council's looking for in the first instance. It'll tick planning, so setbacks for the site plan, height of the building for here, what the elevations look like, and so they need to just know the colours and materials on there. So yeah, so that's really as much for preliminary that you need to submit. Obviously that's a fair bit of work to get your elevations to, you know, to actually look like that, because you've got your garage doors and you've got your, but even if you just put a standard balustrade in to start with, don't worry too much about using a marine wire one, because I have to show you how to do that. If you just put a balustrade and then just say marine wire balustrade, council's not asking for any details of it yet, so then we can swap it out and actually do the actual balustrade, because we'll need to nominate the distance between marine wire and the height on one of our details. So yeah, so you don't necessarily even have to show this elevation, because this one's the one that's joining the other wall, so I would probably tend to just actually get rid of that one and just have those 3. Yeah, but if you've got it there and you want to show it, that's fine. And obviously your levels and things like that. So yeah, so that's where you're heading the next week or so, I suppose, to finish those ones. Now, I've just remembered I'm not going to be here next Wednesday either. I'm away next Wednesday, but I have organised for Tanya to come in. Tanya's another lecturer that she has taught this class before, so she'll be here. But what I'll do on the Tuesday, I might do a little bit of a recording for you guys to watch beforehand, or if you need anything, and of what I was going to do in the morning, so it'll already be there, and then Tanya can just help you one-on-one during the class time if you want. Sound alright? Any other questions about this project at all? I think by looking at where you're all at, you know, this is where we probably should have got to today, so everyone's going well with their timelines.